Howdy, League of Legends gamers! So, Project L got a bit of an update recently, and while the game won't be out until 2023 at the very least, that leaves plenty of time for everyone's favorite pre-launch activity: unrestrained, violent roster speculation. We don't really know what direction they're going to be taking with the game, since development is so early on and we don't really have a ton of information. That said, I will be attempting to theorycraft a roster of characters based on the little bit we can extrapolate from other similar games and previous Riot projects. So, for starters, the roster size. Since Project L is an in-house developed game, they will likely have Riot's vast budget to work with, and plenty of development time since they have emphasized how they aren't rushing a product out the door, they're taking their time to make the best game possible. That, and considering how it is a tag fighter, a decent-sized roster at launch would not be a huge stretch, even if it is the first Riot fighting game. So I'm going to be putting my initial guess at 25 characters. Not necessarily a conservative estimate by any means, but it should be plenty to represent some of the many diverse character archetypes featured in League of Legends. Plus, you already know there's going to be robust post-launch DLC support, so sky's the limit for the end roster size, but that's kind of getting way too ahead of things. Also, as somewhat of a safe guess, based on Riot putting a lot of emphasis on regional identities for their in-game world, as seen in projects like Legends of Runeterra, I would expect them to at least attempt to represent each major region. This would also naturally lend itself to a visually diverse array of character themes. So for this list, I'll be sorting the characters by their respective home regions. So starting off is going to be the new hotness in Runeterra, Piltover and Zaun. Being the focus of the massively successful animated series Arcane, there's a lot of attention on good old P and Z. Back in the day they were largely treated as two separate regions, but now they're more connected than ever before. Anyways, thanks largely in part to Arcane, I would not be surprised in the slightest if the big players from there got more special treatment than they have already so far. The two already confirmed characters from Piltover and Zaun, Jinx and Echo, are pretty good additions on their own merit, even without factoring in Arcane. I would have said those two are pretty much shoo-ins already, with Jinx kind of being the face of Wild Rift, and also being massively popular thanks to her iconic design and her music video. And Echo having his own platformer game announced, as well as also being a standout character design with plenty of unique moveset potential and featuring prominently in True Damage, the other in-universe music group that doesn't really get talked about all that much. I wasn't really sure how they would do Jinx justice in a fighting game, since the 2D fighting game characters have to be able to have a full set of close quarters melee attacks, and Jinx has only used guns and gadgets in the source materials, but Arcane has shown that she can indeed scrap. Next, I would say Vi is probably the closest thing to a guaranteed character that I can think of. Having a tag fighter is the perfect opportunity to create lore-accurate matchups. It would be super cool for Jinx and Vi to have some kind of unique tag super, similar to how Captain America and Winter Soldier do in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. That being said, since she's one of the other main characters of Arcane, it would be pretty surprising if they left her out, especially since her fighting style has lots of neat potential as a quintessential brawler, aggressive type with powerful and wide but committal armored swings. And going even further, a fourth character from Piltover and Zaun wouldn't be all that unlikely either, I think. Jace seems like a pretty solid next in line, but if Arcane Season 2 ends up lining up nicely with the release of Project L, there's plenty of other characters they could choose from. Depending on the direction that they take with Season 2, something like Victor, Warwick, or even Camille or Blitzcrank could be great choices. Caitlyn is another option, but I don't believe her moveset potential would be quite as inspired as some of the other characters I just listed. Going into the next region, we have Noxus, also with two characters already being revealed, those being Darius and Katarina. Katarina has somewhat fallen out of relevancy, but she was one of the old faces of League, and we cannot forget her contribution. Darius is kind of the poster boy for the badass big warrior character archetype in League, and since he's the app icon for Legends of Runeterra, he's pretty much a perfect choice for the game. I think there's room for another Noxus character given how important the region is to the world of Runeterra, being involved in many international storylines. So the most important character to the lore I think they could add would be Swain, the Grand General himself. He could be an interesting take on an install-based character, being able to activate his Devil Trigger as one of his supers. Plus, as a fun note, the 3 Noxian characters would kind of represent the Noxian Trifrix. If you take Katarina loosely filling in for the embodiment of Guile, it kind of makes sense, well, with her being a tricky mobile assassin type character. Going into Ionia, we have Ahri as already confirmed. Ahri is a character that has been somewhat neglected for a while in the main League of Legends canon, despite what her regular appearances in skin lines might lead you to believe. Nonetheless, she's a pretty big fan favorite and has recently gotten a good deal of important character development in the Ruined King RPG, so her inclusion is plenty justified. And continuing the trend of Ruined King protagonists from Ionia, Yasuo seems like a pretty safe bet, consistently being one of the most infamous champions on the Rift ever since his release. Love him or hate him, his flashy hypermobile gameplay would fit right in with a fast-paced fighting game, especially with how there's seemingly an emphasis on launchers and air combos. I mean, that's pretty much what Yasuo's Last Breath combo in League of Legends is, if you really think about it. And while I'm not personally too much of a fan of the idea, I don't know if Riot Games would be able to resist also putting in Yone to go with Yasuo. As mentioned before, the lore matchups in a fighting game are a huge appeal, especially for casual fans, and Yasuo and Yone have got to be one of the most iconic duos. That being said, Yone does have a lot of potential to create a moveset out of, while his special moves would be mostly pretty different from Yasuo, giving them some shared moves to create a Ryu and Akuma or even a Dante and Virgil type situation could be pretty cool. The major roadblock I could think of will be that his signature ability, Soul Unbound, would be functionally pretty similar to Echo's Time Rewind in the context of a 2D fighting game, although probably somewhat in reverse, I guess. Honestly, Ionia is probably the hardest region for me to pin down since it's basically fantasy Japan. A lot of characters kind of just embody the cool anime tropes that are so popular. Something like Zed or Akali could also make for great picks for some high mobility ninja action. Lee Sin could work since his whole identity is based around high skill combos, just like in fighting games. And of course, my personal most wanted, Set, who could be a powerful and imposing grappler type character, a true staple archetype in the fighting game genre. For Demacia, I think the current most relevant ongoing plot thread would without a doubt have to be the Mage Rebellion story. That storyline has been going on for a while without any real payoff, but it remains open for if Riot ever wants to do anything with it in the future. It would definitely make an interesting premise for another RPG perhaps in a similar vein to Ruined King. Anyways, as the key player in this arc, Sylas would be my first pick for a Demacian rep. While I don't exactly think his signature ability of copying his opponent's ultimate ability would be particularly balanced for a competitive fighting game environment, I think it could be a neat touch if they let him tap into a reservoir of iconic Demacian abilities to make up some of his moveset, alongside his chain-based attacks of course. For example, he could break out Garen's Demacian Justice or Lux's Final Spark for his super moves. And with Sylas representing the villain, there would have to be a character that represents the more heroic ideals of Demacia. My pick would be Jarvan IV. While Lux is also a likely choice based on her popularity alone, I think it would be more interesting to represent the martial side of Demacia's combat training. Having his iconic flag and drag combo could make for interesting setups, and translating Cataclysm into a fighting game move would also lead to some potential creativity. Moving into Bilgewater, I feel there are two champs in particular that really represent the region the best, being Gangplank and Misfortune. Of these, I'm picking Gangplank to be in this hypothetical roster. His powder kegs and ability to call down cannonballs could make for some nasty setup situations, so I think he has quite a bit more moveset potential than MF. On the other hand, Bilgewater is also home to a lot of supernatural phenomenon that just intertwines with the ordinary life there. One such character that demonstrates the eccentricity of Bilgewater particularly well, I think, is Illaoi, who, despite not being a super popular pick in League of Legends, has shown to be quite relevant in the lore, and was even one of the starring players in Ruined King. Her playstyle could revolve around aggressive long-range strikes with her tentacles, somewhat akin to Nemesis from MVC. And she could pull supers from Ruined King as well, like her avatar form attack. The Freljord is home to some of League's most iconic characters, and lots of ice. Perhaps I'm leaning too much into recency bias with the Ruined King, but the first character from Freljord I'm including is Braum. He's just a fan favorite character for his cheerful disposition and stunning physique. On top of that, since this game is a tag fighter, I had the idea that it might be cool to make him a more assist-oriented character. Of course, a man of his mountainous stature could still throw hands if he needed to, but a lot of his utility lies in his assist call move. I can imagine him putting up his shield to cover an approach, or to create space for a projectile-focused point character. Maybe it would be a bit of a toxic gameplay style, but at least the fact that Braum is so jolly would make it less salt-inducing. Probably. The second character from Freljord is a bit of an oddball pick, I think, but Nunu and Willump would make a pretty interesting addition. They've been a long-time staple of the League roster, starting off as a hideous feral beast riding a Yeti, into becoming the pure embodiment of whimsy and lighthearted fun. Something that is very much a part of the League of Legends aesthetic that shouldn't be overlooked. Plus, since they're getting their own adventure game through Riot Forge, it seems appropriate that extra attention would be given to this frosty duo. Now with the Shadow Isles, the choices for characters seemed a bit less difficult to predict, given how it's become somewhat of a running joke how much most of the Shadow Isles ensemble gets neglected in supplemental League media. Anyways, Thresh and Viego are my picks for Shadow Isles, somewhat unsurprisingly. Thresh has been built up as somewhat of a mastermind behind the whole Shadow Isle saga, and is always showing up whenever they need an antagonist figure, making him a solid pick for a playable fighter. Just because he is typically a support doesn't mean he's lacking in ways to mess someone up. Viego got somewhat of a bad rep due to his unsatisfactory nature of the Sentinels of Light event, but I still believe he deserves another chance, particularly due to how he's arguably the first real final boss of League of Legends that has had a full storyline from beginning to end at least. You could definitely have some fun gimmicks with the tag fighter system, maybe like being able to call in the enemy assist with his Sovereign Domination ability if he kills one of his two opponents. With the Void, while it's not really a proper region recognized in the League universe necessarily, it's still iconic and distinct enough that it deserves its own pool of champions. You have your pick of creepy-crawly looking void monsters to choose from, of course, but first and foremost, I think by far the most likely character to make it in will be Kaisa. Kaisa has been a massive fan favorite thanks to her fun and flashy gameplay style, and her cool character concept. I think they could really expand on the capabilities of her symbiote suit to create a cool kit for a fighting game. But since the Void is all about alien-looking monsters, it wouldn't be right for the Soul representation to be Zero Suit Samus looking-ass chick. Looking at the roster of Void champs available, they would really have to get creative with the movements and animations to get them to work right. But I definitely think it's something that they would look into, especially for that subset of North American monster-loving fans. My personal guess would be Cho'Gath due to his seniority as the de facto Void monster, but I could also see Kha'Zix working due to how many distinct abilities he has to pull a moveset from. Targon is a hard region to guess in my opinion. A lot of the champs featured there are pretty niche or unorthodox. My first pick for a Targon champion would have to be Pantheon. The badass Spartan warrior is just the first character I think of when I think of Targon, due to how simple but effective his character design is. Still, he's not without his tricks. I think translating his Grand Skyfall move, both the current Starfall iteration and his original pre-rework one into a fighting game move could be pretty fun. My second Targon pick is kind of a hard reach, but I'm gonna throw it out. Helios. With his wide arsenal of weapons and unique playstyle, picking him in League of Legends when he isn't totally overpowered kind of feels like a skill expression flex, which is something that the fighting game players absolutely eat up. Plus, developer flexing by implementing all of his unique guns totally seems like something that they would do for at least a few characters. Now with Shurima, they have not really touched any of the plot threads in a long time. Legends of Runeterra kind of give a slight lore bump to some of the characters that needed it, like Zilean, but for the most part, the story of Shurima has sort of stood still since the resurrection of Azir. Anyways, Azir is currently the most important character in Shurima and definitely deserves a playable spot, perhaps as a kind of puppet fighter. Pulling off a cross-up Shurima shuffle in a fighting game environment could be a thing of beauty if implemented properly. The next character from Shurima is also kind of a far reach, but I think Taliyah could make the cut. While another Ascended like Renekton or Xerath might be the fan favorite pick, Taliyah represents the more modern state of Shurima, and if Riot ever does want to push the storyline of Shurima, I could easily see Taliyah being a character they focus on. Her unpopularity in League largely stems from how difficult and unrewarding it can be to play her, but I do think she could resonate well with players if they put more work into her kit for Project L. And last but not least, Bandle City acts as kind of a stand-in for all the Yordle characters. While they don't seem like the most appropriate for a fighting game at first glance due to their stubby build and short limbs making visually identifiable melee moves being something of a challenge, it would just feel wrong if there wasn't at least one token Yordle added in. So with that, I had to go with Teemo on sheer iconicness alone. The running joke of absolutely despising him from the earlier season is mostly faded away now, and he's pretty much become the mascot of League of Legends at this point, if not just in a you love to hate him kind of way. As for how he could fight, fittingly, he could take a page out of Rocket Raccoon's book, being a projectile-focused character that heavily utilizes traps, in this case being his poison puff caps. But I still think they would have to make some creative liberties for the rest of his moveset. Other Yordles that could work could be Rumble, since he could use his mech suit, or Poppy perhaps, although Poppy probably resonates more as a Demacian character than a Bandle City rep. Anyways, that's the roster. It'll be interesting to look back and see how much I get right. Let me know if you have any characters that you really want to see make it into Project L. I'll definitely be watching the development of this game closely over the next year. Alright, thanks for watching.